Kahini Ranade, class of 2007 from Ridgefield, Connecticut. Kahini, what do you think of the condition of the women's movement is in the United States today?
That's interesting because I think it's not as vocal as it was in the past or obvious, but I think there are definitely women out there who are very conscious of feminist or women's issues in general.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's less enthusiasm for it. I feel like earlier there was a source of pride in being called a feminist, and there really were set goals and people were trying to achieve something. And for some reason that sense of going after something has kind of been lost. I think that we've sort of been convinced, there's been backlash and we've been convinced that we have achieved equality, which I don't believe we have.
Right.
So there are a lot of women I run into who will say, you know, I'm anti-feminist or I don't like women. And you'll find that even at Wellesley, there will be people like during orientation who will say, you know what, I actually hate women. And you're kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
And so I think that's sort of a reaction against feminism,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of the things that get blamed on feminism nowadays are actually things that should be blamed elsewhere, I think, perhaps in the patriarchy or other things.
Yeah.
But so I think that feminism is taking a lot of flack for things that aren't
necessarily feminine.
Right?
Yeah.
So things like the fact that mothers, like new mothers, for instance, have to choose or it becomes a woman's choice. It's never the man's choice, but to choose between being a career woman or staying at home full time. It's like there's no in between. You either do one or the other, and either way you're going to get flack for it. So women will say it's feminism's fault. If it weren't for feminism, I wouldn't have to make this choice. And it was like feminism got us at least that far, but something stopped feminism's progress there. So I think feminism has kind of been, it was going so well and then it came to sort of a grinding halt just as we were about to make really big steps.
And recognizing the female aspects of caretaking as equivalent to the sort of traditionally male aspects of economy, labor, market work as equal. Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily. I mean, I don't think that you could it would be really hard to say, okay, so, well, I mean, I know actually there are people who've done calculations, and this is how much a working mother, not a working mother, but doing mother work would earn a woman in 1 year if you were to transfer that into a salary. But I don't think it comes with the same, I don't think you can equate it to like a corporate job, for instance. It's definitely different, but I think that men and women should have the same should have to make the same choices about it. So like it should be just as much a burden on the man. It should be a burden, first of all, but it should also fall to the man as well as the woman. Or whoever is in that relationship. If it's two women, if it's two men, both people should be actively involved in that decision, and it shouldn't just be one of them going, well, I like my job better and you have less promise, something like that. I think it shouldn't be something like I made a choice that was actually made for me.
Exactly. Yeah. What do you think the future of feminism is in the United States in terms of the issues, the types of struggles that feminists are dealing with?
I think it's going to be more subtle than in the past because initially the struggle was just to get into the Ivy League schools, to say I want to go to Princeton, just to be able to get in there, to be able to get into the workplace in the first place, to be able to become a lawyer, that kind of thing. Now I think it's much more subtle because we've gained entry into those places and there are more women becoming doctors and lawyers nowadays. There are more women college students now than men, which I guess could be taken as a sign of progress, and I do think that's a great thing. At the same time, I feel like once you get into the workforce, a lot of it the kinds of careers women choose, first of all, there are many more elementary school teachers who are women than men, that sort of thing. Right. Also, the discrimination they face in the workforce once you get there. So, for instance, it can matter a lot. They've done psychological studies that show when a woman comes into an interview wearing a suit that has a skirt, like a skirt suit versus a pantsuit, that can have a very different reception. So somebody looking at a woman in a pantsuit will say oh, she's too aggressive, whereas if she's wearing a skirt suit, they'll implicitly think, okay, she's sort of a floozy,
Yeah,
So,
and it's kind of a psychological ingrained perception about women.
So they won't consciously sit there and be like, she is a floozy because I see her, that kind of thing. But I think, so it's much more, that's what I mean by more subtle, it's less obvious because you can't read somebody else's mind and sit there thinking, I know that's why I didn't get the job. But the fact is it happens, and I think a lot of times people like to convince themselves that sort of discrimination doesn't exist, because it makes sense. I mean, you want to try to be part of a powerful male group, I guess.
Yeah.
And you want to align yourself more with them, but
or the perceived powerful
exactly,
male group,
rather than saying, you know what, I see a problem here, because we're not raised to believe, we're raised to believe we're equals.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact is, when we get to the workplace or wherever and discover that we're not actually treated as such, it's like, what happened? You know, you don't know what to attribute it to, so you'll say, oh, it was my resume wasn't good enough, or, you know, you'll blame it on yourself, essentially, which is hard. So,
yeah.
yeah.
What are some of your who are some of your female role models, or, you know, mentors that have kind of been an inspiration to you, you know, strong women who you admire?
Right. You know, it's interesting, I never actually met her, but my mother's mother was a single working mother in India in the mid-60s onwards, and so I think that was like a very difficult position to be in, especially because she was poor, you know, like she was really
Absolutely.
trying to, you know, keep up 3 kids, all that stuff, and so she was the like quintessential working mom, essentially. Wow, how many times can I say essential? So I think she's a role model for me because she went against so many stereotypes of what the Indian widow should be.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, is great. A lot of my Wellesley professors, actually. I didn't realize it until I started comparing my experiences to my friends' college experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But I took it for granted that so many of the professors I have here are female.
Yes.
But knowing that they're able to go on, especially because academia is such a male-dominated field, but
Mm-hmm.
seeing professors who are, you know, foremost in their fields in like political science and regular science and all kinds of fields that are generally dominated by men, and economics too, are really quite empowering. So
Definitely.
I would say like I admire most of them for that. I'm trying to think. I mean, Anne Garrell, she's a reporter for NPR, and she was actually covering the war in Baghdad before, just like the invasion of Baghdad when we initially went into Iraq. It started in 2003. And so she was there for like 6 months, and she was a female journalist in, again, a field that's generally dominated by men,
Right.
but also in a portion of the world where like she wasn't necessarily treated as a white woman, you know, she's
Right.
sort of like, she really did
An
stand
outsider.
out. Exactly. So she was actually really clever in the way she was able to sort of get around some of the security clearances and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I thought it really took a lot of courage to be able to get in there like one of the boys, you know, and cover the war. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Kahini.
1 second.
We have one more question.
As an American of South Asian descent, what are some of the challenges that you see that South Asian women have to deal with when it comes to their own feminism? Or
Do you mean South Asian women from South Asia or South Asian American women? Because I think
both, but if you can speak to whatever you relate most to, that would be good.
Okay, well, I personally relate to South Asian American women more. I was born in the United States, and also of a certain class. I mean, the fact is that I was, you know, raised in a fairly well-off family, and we never really faced, I would never consider us poor, you know, and so I think that makes a huge difference in your feminism, is class, actually. But in terms of issues that we face, I mean, I personally think that there's a stereotype of South Asian American girls as being very docile and submissive and quiet. So I think that if you fit that stereotype, it's like, oh, you can walk all over her. And if you don't fit that stereotype, then you're automatically like this really aggressive, mannish kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's like either way, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Right.
So I think, you know, trying to resist those stereotypes in different ways, you know, trying to show that, okay, I'm not going to sit here and run all over you, but just because, you know, I voice my opinions, but at the same time, just because I'm quiet today doesn't mean that I'm this little lamb that you can feel free to treat as a doormat.
Right.
So for me, that's like one of the issues that I find is most compelling to me as a South Asian American woman. I think, yeah, that's like the number one. There are definitely others, but yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Kahini.
You're welcome.